There you go. There's a moat between us and the press. I see here. Sorry about that.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We've got just under 20 minutes to take your questions. If I can ask you, please, to state your name and affiliation before asking the question, and let's keep ourselves to one and a quick follow-up so we can get through everybody. There's handheld microphone, and there's a microphone at the front here. If you can please use it as we are webcasting. Libre à vous de poser vos questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. With that, if you're ready, Governor, we'll start. Who's first? I got Jennifer Kwan from Reuters down here. Go ahead.
Hi, Governor. Just wanted to, if you could clarify something that you mentioned in your speech closer to the conclusion. Just wondering if you could clarify why you mentioned this idea of leaning against imbalances. And have you become more concerned about household debt, and are you considering raising rates to curb it?
That passage was an example of, to give the full gamut of monetary policy action. So the speech obviously was about uncertainty as a whole. It's about policymakers providing as much certainty as possible. We have a very clear monetary policy framework in Canada, most recently expounded at some length in the inflation control agreement released earlier this year. So that's one example of where we could use the full suite of monetary action. But if we ever were to do that, absolutely hypothetical, then we would be very transparent that we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what we expect the impact to be. With respect to the situation in household debt and housing finance in Canada, as you know, the government of Canada has taken action on 4 occasions. Those actions to address some issues in mortgage finance. In our view, we've said this on many occasions. I'll reiterate today, those actions have been both timely and prudent. OSFI has taken measures to enhance underwriting standards for housing-related debt, standards that have come into effect very recently. And also banks are in the process of raising capital towards Basel III capital standards. So the sum of those actions are still having an impact on the adjustment in housing finance. And so we, like the government, like OSFI, and the private sector, for that matter, are watching with great interest the sum of those policies and the effect on the evolution of household debt. So, I'll leave it at that. But the point was a hypothetical one to ensure people properly understand our overall monetary policy framework. Action has been taken. We've always said that monetary policy is the last line of defense, that's a pretty fulsome answer to your question, I think.
And just a quick follow-up. Today we had some housing data that suggested that the market may be cooling more than some people expected, or faster than some people expected. Are you concerned about a hard landing in the housing market?
We're expecting an adjustment. I mean, first thing, we will update our full forecast in the course of the next 10 days and release that with the monetary policy report. We have been expecting a slowing in the housing market. We're seeing some signs of that. And there is some desirability, obviously, given your first question, to an easing there. But we continue to watch the situation, along with others, very closely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Gentleman there.
Okay. Hi, Governor. I'm Robert Barron from the Nanaimo Daily News. I was wondering, as you are aware, the province has decided to scrap its harmonized sales tax here in BC. I'm wondering, from your perspective, will that help or hinder our economy?
Well, you've asked a question that I can't answer. I mean, I could answer it, but I won't answer it. How's that? Because those decisions are absolutely squarely in the responsibility of the provincial government, and certainly not the Bank of Canada. So I'll give you a free follow-up on a different topic, if you don't mind. I'm happy to. Yeah. Okay. That's it. That's okay. All right.
Gentleman back there.
Sorry, it's Stephen Smart from CBC Television. Along the same housing line, Governor, I just want to be clear, is the slowing that we're seeing, does that match with what you were expecting or what you were hoping to see?
I wouldn't put too much weight on one data point. We're in part there's a transition during the summer and into the early part of the fall where both the underwriting standards, the new underwriting standards of OSFI, and the most recent steps that the federal government has taken on mortgage insurance rules, both of those coming into effect, and so there's always going to be some volatility in the data associated with that. But we have expected, just to be clear, broad brush, we have expected the contribution of housing to slow and to reduce. We'll update precisely how much in the course of the next 10 days or so. Let's put all of this into context. Housing, as a percentage of GDP, has been running well above its historic average for several years now. And things come back down, towards their averages. That's entirely reasonable to expect. We do expect adjustment over the medium term. And what that means is that housing will not be an outsized contributor to Canadian growth, including through what we call a financial accelerator channel, a channel by which individuals borrow against an increased value of their house and they consume against that. So both of those factors won't be there. Which means we need other engines of growth, consumption, and investment particularly.
And just related to that, a number of analysts have talked about a housing bubble outside of the condo markets in Toronto and Vancouver. Do you see a housing bubble in Canada?
We see that, and we've said this, that we see that valuations in some markets have become stretched, and we would expect an adjustment over time in those valuations. And I spoke at length at this. It was just before Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. Maybe everyone's wiped that from memory, actually. We wiped both Game 7 and the aftermath and my speech so we've seen some firmness in valuation stretched in some territories and some areas, and we have expected that they would adjust over time. And I would say that our forecast, again, we will update, it's coming out in 10 days, but our July forecast, our most recent one, it incorporated the dynamics from that in the forecast. So obviously if house prices, let's put it at a minimum, don't continue to rise at the pace they have in the past, that has an impact on new housing starts, but also on consumption, borrowing against the value of those houses, as you know. So that suffices, I think.
Did you have a question, gentleman next to
you?
Yeah.
Dirk Meisner, Canadian Press. This is another one that you might not want to answer, but are you going to run for the federal Liberal leadership?
I definitely don't want to answer that. Look, I am doing my job. I'm going to do my job. Pretty simple. I've got 2 years and change, at least. 2 and change left on my mandate.
What about other federal politics other than Liberal leadership, possibly just running for an MP job?
Why don't I become a circus clown? I mean, it's like, I appreciate the great concern about my career, but I have gainful employment, and I intend to continue it. And I suggest we get back to the more difficult topic of monetary policy and the more important topic of the outlook for the island economy and the Canadian economy.
We've got Chris down here and then the gentleman next to him. You just use that microphone there, I think. Yeah.
Governor Carney, I'm Chris from Bloomberg. Statistics Canada earlier this month made historical revisions to gross domestic product that showed that it was a bit stronger than previously thought. We're just wondering, to what extent do these changes make any difference in your outlook?
That's a great question, Chris. That's one we're working through right now as we update our forecast that we'll release next week. The revisions in the grand scheme of things are relatively minor, and there's some revisions to components which are interesting. But what we will do next week is update our views of potential growth in Canada, obviously our views on the output gap as a consequence, both of those revisions, and our views on potential, and bring that as one element of our outlook for growth and inflation in Canada.
Okay, thanks.
CTV News, Vancouver Island.
Yep.
The Chinese market remains relatively lumber hungry. You spoke optimistically about resurgence in U.S. Consumption for labor as to do with the housing market. Can you speak to how that could affect productivity at island mills and obviously optimism?
Well, I think we should be careful, obviously, in the U.S., not to get too carried away. But with that caveat, say this: I think we see, as others do, average household formation, natural household formation in the United States is something in the 1.1, 1.2 million per year. So that gives us some sense of kind of a natural level of housing starts over the medium term. Obviously, the U.S. market got carried away from itself in the run-up to the crisis, peaked at 2.1 million starts, I think, certainly around 2 million, and has fallen below 500,000 in recent years. We're seeing that pick up, as certain people on the island see, to about 750, a little higher right now. And our expectation is that this will continue, this growth in starts will continue over the next several years and move not quite up to that longer-term average, but in that direction. That's very positive. That helps with operating leverage, obviously, at island mills, and it should, over time, help with, support the actual SPF price. So it matters. But it's not, obviously, a return to the pre-crisis exorbitant housing demand in the U.S. That said, there's been substantial adjustment both on the island, across BC, across Canadian forestry sector. Some of that's been quite painful, but the productivity has improved, and this should help. This should help with that because of, as I say, because of operating leverage. Last thing I'll say, though, which is that the opportunity which in in China, which has been in many respects created by Canadian forest products firms, is a secular opportunity as opposed to a cyclical opportunity. I mean, there really is a gradual development for wood framing that's happening in China above and beyond the urbanization and other big secular trends. So even in a world where China is slowing, which it has, one would expect that sort of base growth of demand would continue. And again, the more we're oriented, firms here and across Canada oriented towards that demand, the better we're going to be.
Governor Carney, thank you very much for being here today. I'm Toby Gorman with the Nanaimo News Bulletin. My question is, the federal government has been largely responsible for generating economic stimulus over the last 4 years. How important is it for private sector to run with that ball at this point?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think there's two aspects. I'll just note, I mean, obviously monetary policy has contributed a lot to stimulus as well. I mean, the federal government, provincial governments, their spending, tax adjustments, other factors were very important contributors to helping the economy to get out of recession, without question. And now, as implied by your question, those governments are taking the appropriate steps to gradually reduce budget deficits over time, and that's clearly the right thing to do. Monetary policy is very accommodative right now, and is likely to remain so for some time, very accommodative. And that creates that private sector opportunity. Now, that private sector opportunity is not, as per the earlier questions, going to be in the housing sector per se. Other measures have been taken to help moderate that. It shouldn't be driving household debt, so it's really an opportunity that is around business and business investment. We will do what we can to reduce uncertainty here in Canada, uncertainty about the financial sector, where I don't think there's a lot, but we'll stay on top of that. uncertainty, transparency about monetary policy, directly our responsibility. We will continue to do what we can to explain what's going on in the world so that businesses can isolate the uncertainties that are there. And when we do all of that, we boil it down to a few simple realities. One, our financial system works and can be expected to continue to work. Secondly, unfortunately, across Canadian business, you can say unfortunately or fortunately, we're not as productive as our competitors, and so that's an opportunity. And thirdly, we haven't fully exploited major emerging markets, which is a huge opportunity for Canada. And again, that's something that where we can tackle it directly. So yes, it is the handoff to business, and business has been picking things up and will need to continue if Canada is going to grow at a reasonable pace. Thanks.
Is there anyone who hasn't asked a question? Yeah. Okay, we've got to go. So
okay. This is an extension of what Toby asked. You indicated in your speech, Mark, about companies worldwide sitting on money. How much of an issue is that in Canada? And if that is an issue, would you recommend policy to government to spur on that investment and get money pumped back from the private sector back into the economy to get things moving that way?
Well, globally it's an issue. There are large. There are some jurisdictions in Europe. It's less of an issue because of the depth of the recession there and the strains there. But certainly in the United States, as well as here in Canada, relative to assets, relative to net worth, relative to historic levels, there are high cash balances. Some of that's understandable because of the uncertainty, and that I spoke at length about that. Again, it needs to be put into context. We will obviously take into account corporate intentions in the setting of monetary policy by maintaining accommodative monetary policy, highly accommodative monetary policy. It does put pressure on business to ultimately put money to work. They're very good at that. They can, they're the ones with the ideas and the options, and over time, we think they will. But we'll take it into account in the context of our mandate. For governments, various levels of governments, there's various things they could do to help catalyze investment. But I would leave it to them to decide whether that's at the regional or provincial or national level.
Okay, that's going to be the end. I'm sorry, folks, we've got a plane to catch. Thank you very much, and thanks to the conference center, John, and all his staff.